So, this week's podcast is about mastering time. The irony of this is that I'm recording it at the last minute here in Penrith while staying in Sydney this week to do some work. Worked with Pepsi this week, which was good. Good workshop with those guys. But what if I told you that how much of what you think you can control is actually an illusion? But time is one of the few things you can truly shape with intention. And how you use it really does define everything. Time governs, every facet of our existence, yet its essence is both universally experienced and also deeply personal. And in this week's episode, I'm going to take you through the origins of time as a human construct, explore how our perceptions can bend its flow, and also give you some strategies to control your time and be more intentional in using your time. Well, let's start first with the origin of time as a human construct. So, early societies relied on natural phenomena to gauge time. And if we start with the Sumerians, who lived around 3100 to 1750 BCE, thousands of years ago, you could find yourself walking through the bustling streets of one of the world's first cities, Uruk. The Sumerians, who lived in Mesopotamia, which is now modern-day Iraq, were one of the earliest known civilizations. From them, we have a real glimpse of the first recorded writing system. I'm reading about it at the moment in the book Civilizations. It's really interesting. And we know they built advanced cities. And we know that they played a huge role in how we measure time today. They were grappling with all these things in their own existence. And have you ever wondered why an hour has 60 minutes, for instance? Well, that's because the Sumerians used a base 60, so a sexagesimal system, which still influences our timekeeping and even how we measure angles today. And if we're still in the ancient world, but a lot more modern, so during the times of the ancient Egyptians, if you lived then in ancient Egypt, so you could stand at the foot of the pyramids, which some historians and archaeologists believe these to be massive sundials used to track time. And the Egyptians used the movement of the sun to structure their days. And they created really advanced solar calendars based on these experiences. Looking up into the heavens and watching the movement of stars was something that really influenced their understanding of time. So this all led to some of the first organised systems of dividing the year into months and days. And we know they haven't got it exactly right because we have to amend the year during leap years and so on and so forth. Maybe there's a better way to do it, I don't know. Maybe the Americans could take on the metric system too. So that's the early relationship that we had with time. But what I'm really interested in is our modern perception of it. And so what I want to sort of unpack is the psychology of how we perceive time. So let's talk about how time feels. Have you ever been sort of in a situation where you're waiting for something exciting? You remember what it was like when you were waiting for Christmas Day when you were a kid. So you'd go to sleep on Christmas Eve and you just couldn't sleep. You were so excited. And the night stretched on forever. Or maybe the start of a long-awaited holiday or the end of a long year at school. That last few weeks of school seems to take forever. So sometimes time can seem to crawl. Other days it can feel like the day was just so long. It was amazing. I had all the time for everything I wanted. Or you could be surfing, roller skating, skateboarding, mountain bike riding, and what was an hour went by in a flash of an eye. What was the afternoon, so a 6-hour time frame, felt like a few minutes to you. That's not just a feeling that you have. There's actually psychology at work. And the brain has a role in this. Your perception of time actually isn't fixed. Your perception of time bends and stretches depending on your focus. It can depend on your emotions, and it can even depend on the stress that you're feeling. There's so much going on inside your brain with our relationship to the moment we're in, the chemicals that we're producing, the stresses that we're sensing, that it all has an impact on how time feels. And neuroscientists have found that when you're paying close attention, time feels slower because your brain is recording more detail. And that's why those childhood summers felt endless. Your brain was soaking in everything as new experiences. There's also an emotional influence at play here, which you might find interesting. Anxiety and anticipation can make time drag, while excitement can make it fly by, especially if you're engaged. Have you ever noticed how a dull meeting feels like it lasts forever, but a great conversation over coffee seems to end too soon? Or perhaps you're in a plank. A minute can be a long time if you're trying to hold a plank. But if you're listening to your favorite song, 3 minutes can be over like that. That's your brain adjusting its internal clock and perception. And then there's something called the kappa effect, which can really mess with how we perceive time. If you see two things happening close together in space and time, your brain might think the time between them is longer than it really is. This is why long road trips to a new place feel longer than the way back. Your brain processes new information differently than the familiar return trip, where the front of your brain, which is dealing with that short-term memory, is sped up. So what does this all mean for us, and how might we manipulate this from perhaps a leadership perspective, just an existence perspective? If you want time to slow down for you, you introduce novelty. So travel, learn a new skill, or change your routine. Your brain will register these experiences more deeply, making time feel richer, more abundant. But if you want to make time feel more manageable, try mindfulness, yoga. Studies show that focusing on the present moment can stretch time in a good way, making you savor experiences and feel more in control of your day. Being intentional makes time go longer. So there's also this elasticity in time that occurs in daily life. So if you think about the last time you were in a state of flow, where time disappeared because you were so engaged, that's called time elasticity. And it's one of the more fascinating things about how we experience time. So why does it happen? Well, flow is this state where you're so immersed in an activity that everything else sort of fades away. But here's the key. Flow happens when you're working at the edge of your ability, where the challenge of the task is just slightly beyond your current skill level. And psychologists have found that this balance between challenge and your ability is what keeps you fully engaged. So this is why when you're first learning to do something like, say, for instance, surfing, it can feel really hard. It can be challenging for you. Time may stretch out for hours, but then once you master it and you are there in the moment, in the waves, time can feel like it's gone really fast because you've been in a flow state every time you've been on those waves, and you've managed to actually learn this skill that you're now applying. So interestingly, from that psychological perspective, when your brain is in a flow state, the neuroscience of that shows that your prefrontal cortex, so the part of your brain responsible for self-monitoring and doubt, actually quietens down. And what this does, it allows you to have a deeper focus and more uninterrupted engagement. And I certainly get this. So for instance, mountain biking, I did the Cape to Cape a few years ago, and going down some of those hills on the third day where I'd finally mastered where to put the bike and what to do at speed to stay upright, I realized that there was this dopamine release that I was also getting, and it was reinforcing the motivation. And actually, it was making going up the hills, which was hard and arduous, more pleasurable, because I knew at the top I'd be able to get into this flow state for a kilometer or 2 kilometers or even, longer going down. Now, Angela Duckworth, she's known for her work on grit. She also has something to contribute in this space, because she suggests that people who consistently engage in deliberate practice, focused, goal-orientated practice just beyond their current abilities, so doing something that you enjoy but that is hard and you continue to apply yourself to it, experience flow much more often. And this is because they are continually challenging themselves at just the right level, increasing both their skill and engagement over time. And that's why flow is so important for time management, because you can stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone. Now, interestingly, our modern brains are trying to stop us getting into this state. The other day I had to do this task, a boring task. I had to count about 500 dominoes in pairs into four different groups. And what I found is, as I was counting, my brain was trying to find other things to do, thinking about, childhood friends, thinking about holidays I'd been on, thinking about being back in Afghanistan, thinking about going camping, thinking about stuff in the business I was meant to do. It was trying to do everything except the task at hand, which is to just count these dominoes out into the 4 different groups. And this focus, this lack of ability to be able to focus on one task, is very concerning, because in the modern era, if you want to be really successful, you need to be able to apply laser-like focus to one job and get it done and do it really well, and then move to the next, rather than spread all of your time into different buckets, I guess. So what about time in leadership and crisis management? So, I want to draw on a lesson here from my counterterrorism training back around 2002. I was training for counterterrorism operations back in the kill house. It's a close quarters combat training range. And one thing became clear really fast. If you rushed, you would get flustered and you'd miss the target, or worse, you'd get shot back if it was opposed training with paint rounds. And what I found in that training, even though I was one of the students, just watching the guys who were really good at it, is the best operators slowed down. They focused on the mechanics and they moved really deliberately. And over time, by slowing down, they actually seemed so much faster. And I guess this is the essence of the saying, and they use it a lot in the military. So slow is smooth, smooth is fast. In high pressure situations, reacting too quickly can lead to poor decisions. But when you take deliberate, measured action, you not only maintain control, you actually move faster. You're able to be more accurate. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast, and then that fast is final. You don't have to do it twice. Now, I think when I want to talk about time in particular and the management of time as a leader, conducting a personal time audit, I think, is something that can't be understated. Overstated? Can't be stated enough. What am I looking for here? You need to be able to do it, right? You have to do it. You have to do a time audit to really understand where your time's going. If you ever feel like there just aren't enough hours in the day, like you're constantly busy, but at the end of the week you're not sure actually what you've achieved or where all that time went, then I think it's a good idea to do a time audit. Now, personally, I used to think I had a really good handle on how I spent my time until I actually tracked it. And what I found was pretty shocking. I guess most people assume they're using their time to full advantage. But when you actually audit your time, you realize how many hours slip through the cracks. And the truth is, a lot of us aren't really that busy. We're just busy being distracted. And that's why I think if you want to talk about something deceptively simple but incredibly powerful, the time audit is that thing that can really change the needle on what you're doing. It's not about cramming more in your day. It's about making sure that the hours you spend actually move you forward. I think there's a common myth, that people who feel overwhelmed just need better time management. But the studies show that the real problem isn't time, it's actually attention. And the average professional loses 2 to 3 hours a day in inefficiencies. So that's 15 hours a week. That's almost 2 full work days of scrolling mindlessly or inattention to a specific task. Okay, so how do you fix it? Well, you can't change what you don't measure. So by tracking for 1 week, write down everything you do, not just the big stuff, like every email, every quick scroll on your phone, every trip to the fridge when you're procrastinating. You don't need a fancy system, a simple notebook, a spreadsheet, or an app like Toggle or Rescue Time. Something like that will work just fine. The key is to be brutally honest, though. The way I was doing it was just on the notepad on my iPhone. So it's not about judgment. It's all about the collection of data. And then at the end of the week, the data won't lie. You then categorize your activities. Once you've tracked your time, the next step is just to figure out where it went. So how much of your time was spent on deep, meaningful work versus bouncing between tasks? How much of your leisure time was actually restful versus mindlessly scrolling? You go to bed at 8, 8:30, you get up at 6, you think you've had that 8, 9, 10 hours sleep, and actually you go to bed at 8 and you've been on your phone for 3 hours scrolling rubbish. That's not good time management. And then did you make time for your health, exercise, sleep, proper meals? How often did you check your emails or messages, and did you really need to? Or can you put it into buckets of time where you just look at it, maybe once a day? The patterns can be really revealing. And you can see what's serving you well and what's quietly stealing your time and ultimately stealing your life away. And then you have to analyze the patterns. And this is where it gets really interesting. It certainly did for me. When you look at your time log, you'll probably notice a few things. Some activities clearly align with your goals, and hopefully by now you've all set some goals and you're managing your time towards them. And then other lots of time aren't. The first time I did this, I realized I was spending nearly 8 hours a week on tiny distractions. So checking emails 4 or 5 times a day, bouncing between my 4 different business things that I do, scrolling my phone between tasks. And here's the kicker. None of the stuff I was doing where I was applying myself for 5 or 10 minutes was really urgent. The things that were urgent, I was literally applying myself to for an hour or 2 hours and getting things done. But the other things that I was just picking up, that the distractions was where my lost time basically was, and it added up. So once I had all this information, that's where I started to take control. And you can do the same thing by asking yourself 3 simple questions. What can I cut? So are there distractions or low value tasks that don't need to be part of my day? What can I delegate? Are you doing things that someone else could do just as well or better? And this is where I have outsourced some things to Fiverr, to a couple of guys who I'm now friends with actually, who can do things better than me. I'm not as good at making PDFs as they are. They're faster, and I'm able to, just give them the direction. They do a better job. And what needs more attention? Are there areas of your life, your health, your relationships, your deep work that deserve more of your time? Remember, it's not all about being happy. It might be about being creative. It might be about building something. It might be about legacy, not always just about mindfully scrolling for dopamine. Maybe this is where I should talk ever so briefly about vaping and how much I despise and hate it. So you've probably all stopped listening to me now and unfollowed me, but I can think of nothing more insidious and pathetic than humans walking around sucking on a dopamine whistle. Tradies smelling like blueberry or musk. Like, seriously, people, come on. What are you doing? Like, if you want to get those dopamine hits, go and lift some weights. Anyway, I just think it's one of the worst things to steal both our time, but also our ability to feel genuine pleasure. That obviously there's reasons there that people are doing that. And if you want to stop doing it, like my dad said when he actually died of cancer, which may well have been from smoking. I asked him one day why he didn't stop smoking, and he said, because I'm not a quitter. And he obviously liked it. Okay, you do you, mate. But I think there's better ways to spend our time than searching for that quick dopamine rush, which is what our brain is trying to make us do. Maybe I'll do a whole nother podcast on the dopamine whistle. But anyway, letting myself be distracted here. So after realizing I was losing around 8 hours a week to my distractions, I made 3 pretty simple changes. First, I started blocking off deep work time. So no notifications, no emails, no distractions, just focus. And the difference was pretty immediate. Well, this podcast is a result of that work. So the relaunching of my new podcast. Second, I set clear time boundaries. Instead of checking emails all day, which I was doing, I gave myself specific windows to respond. And that alone saved me hours. And then thirdly, I was really intentional about where my best energy goes. So instead of wasting time on things that drained me, I shifted my focus to strategic thinking. My personal fitness has always had a lot of my attention, I guess. And then quality time with my family, which is, it can be quite a difficult thing depending on the relationships and also the circumstances of your particular family unit and how it operates, especially if it's not together. And the result is that I got those 8 hours back. And the best part is that it didn't feel like I was working harder. I was just being smarter and, again, intentional. So time then, it's the most valuable currency we have. As I've said to you listening to my podcast before, I don't take it lightly that I have your attention. And so I want to use that time for you and for me well. It's the most valuable currency is time. And then where you spend your time really determines who you become. The difference between people who feel, I guess, in control and those who feel constantly overwhelmed isn't time itself. It's how they are allocating their time. Right, so here's your challenge. I want you to start your own time audit. Track your time for a week. See where it really goes. Maybe find your flow, do something challenging yet enjoyable. Pay attention to when you're most productive. For me, it's between the hours of 6 and 10 in the morning. Be intentional. So prioritize what truly matters. Okay, and that's it for this week. If this episode resonated with you, maybe share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you got someone who's like my sister in your life who's always late, share this podcast with them. Yep, shout out to you, sis. And if you want more insights on leadership resilience, then have a look at the newsletter. Comes out tomorrow, actually, so every Tuesday. Until next time, use your time wisely.